All right. So by means of an introduction or continuing what we've been doing, this study of ours, um, one might hear the word Talmud, maybe not rabbinic literature, but Talmud, and think halacha, Jewish law. And that's true in many cases. Jewish law is based upon not just Talmud, but the Babylonian Talmud. And not just the Babylonian Talmud, but according to certain authorities that kind of stood out and made their way, more than other authorities interpreting the Babylonian Talmud. One example that is Maimonides is usually not the primary source for halacha, for Jewish law, in the Ashkenazic or the Sephardic world, for that matter. Rather, the Tur, Rabbi Yaakov Bal HaTurim, in Ashkenaz, 14th century, if I remember correctly, and maybe 15th century. And then even more so, the interpretation of the Tur that was given by Rabbi Yosef Karo in the 16th century and Rabbi Moshe Isserlich in Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat in the land of Israel, and Rabbi Moshe Isserlich in Krakow in Poland. And the interpretations they gave in the 16th century, and then those two were interpreted by certain rabbis who received more of a hold on just a second, excuse me. Sorry, just a moment. All right then. So back to Talmud as the basis for halachic literature. And it is, but as we've already seen, there's Aggadic material, sometimes translated legendary material, but Agadah basically, as opposed to if halacha is what we as Jews do with our lives, our hands, our feet, our mouths, Agadah is what we Jews have done with our minds and our hearts and our souls. And the meeting of the two, for instance, is in the idea of kavanah, of intentionality, which came up just in our Torah session yesterday, but it's going to come up today as well. This idea of, on one hand, you have to say something, you have to say a prayer, but what do you mean? What do you feel when you're there? And while halacha can't really dictate what the kavanah is, right? And this, by the way, this goes back to last Shabbat's Torah study, Friday evening with Rabbi Art Green, telling us that you can't, that ongoing debate, can you command one to love, ve'ahavta? Can you command one to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind? How can you command love? It's something you fall in love. You don't command love. And the Zoharic, the Kabbalistic interpretation, that when you experience the oneness of God and saying Shema Yisrael, and you realize that God, all this is one, all this is God, then you'll be filled with joy. You'll fall in love. You'll fall in love with God. You'll fall in love with the universe, so to speak. So we're talking a lot about this nexus between what you do and what you and what you feel and how you go into it, and that's going to be in today's section as well. So is this halachic literature? Yeah, some of it is. We're going to see some of it has to do with halacha. Some of it has to do with, maybe we don't say Jewish law per se, but good ways to live your life. The kind of the literature you used to get. I don't think you get it anymore, but at the checkout stand in the supermarket, those little paperback books about, or the self-help literature, the 7 ways to be a good leader, all those kinds of things, right? So is that halacha or is that eitzah? Is that just advice? And that brings us into the literary genre of wisdom literature. So just like we break down biblical literature, some of it is law, some of it is poetry / liturgy, some of it is historiography, some of it is just narrative, and some of it is wisdom literature, right? Book of Job, the book of Proverbs, some of the Psalms, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Those are examples of wisdom literature. And as opposed to, say, the book of Ecclesiastes or the book of Proverbs, which is all wisdom literature, as opposed to, say, Job, which is mostly wisdom literature, except for a story at the beginning and the end. The Talmud, you can't break it down into, other than the tractate of Avot, which could be Pirkei Avot, which could be considered, I think, just wisdom literature and not halacha. On any given page of Talmud, you have intertwined with each other halacha and agadah. That is what we do and what we feel. And what we feel, by the way, is often an embellishment of a biblical story, a biblical narrative. And also, and wisdom literature, which is kind of in between that world of what you do and what you feel, right? It's not a mitzvah, as in God commanded you to do this, but this is how you should live a good life. That's kind of wisdom literature. And of course, none of this is unique to Judaism, to the Jewish tradition, and before that, the Israelite tradition. But this is our prized example of it, the Babylonian Talmud. I say that in the looking back from the 21st century, and it's been reclaimed quite a bit in recent years. The internet certainly helped with that. The fact that you've got non-Orthodox, non-yeshiva people studying Daf Yomi, the daily page of Talmud, that's like an amazing thing, right? Now, in what ways are they able to really go into depth in the Talmud? I don't know. I've never been part of one of those books. It doesn't beckon to me to read a page of Talmud every day to finish it in 7 years. I know that I'm not going to last, so I'm not even going to go there. But I would rather spend more time on everything in text, as I think all of you know by now. So all that is by ways of an explanation as kind of why are we doing the Babylonian Talmud, for those of you that asked. 2, what's in the Babylonian Talmud, what's on a typical page, or maybe there is no such thing as a typical page. And 3, in paving the way for what we're going to do today. We are in the context of a chapter that talked about when you see miracles, what you see around you, things in nature, things in history, be aware and give thanks for them, give praise for them, being mindful of what's going on around you in the past, now, I assume to influence your future as well. We're going to get to the future in a few weeks, and it's going to be hinted at the end of today. And when we get to it, I'll mention what that is. We're going to get to some dealings with the future, and we're going to get to some uncomfortable areas. Today, we're going to be in an uncomfortable area that has to do with physicality. And how do we get here? Because I said the context is blessings and miracles, and now we're dealing with all sorts of other things. A very simple reason, which is not exciting, even boring, and maybe some of you will roll your eyes. Did anybody notice in the previous time, and maybe even, maybe the previous time, the top of the page, a particular name that keeps repeating itself in the Talmud? So I would tell you, Va'amar, in the beginning of Hebrew, we have here Va'amar Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda said, we're going through a catalog of Rav Yehudas, right? So what happened is, in the context of something we did 2 weeks ago, it brought Rav Yehuda's opinion, and then it's as if either the people living this in oral traditions discussing said, oh, and another thing by Rav Yehuda, and another thing by Rav Yehuda, or the person who copied it down said, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about Rav Yehuda? I got a whole card catalog of Rav Yehuda quotes here that I'm gonna show you. I mean, think of all the ways that we have conversations, that we write, that we, the ways our minds go from one place to another. So this is a simple rule or characteristic of the editing of the Talmud, is that, and we don't know if it's, I don't know if it's oral or if it's only in the written form. Scholars greater than I would have to comment on that. I'm sure they've written about that. Is that this kind of associative thinking? It's not only in content, it's not only in words, right? A word in one verse connects you to a word in another verse in biblical literature, but it's also in the context of who gave us that tradition, in whose name is that tradition given to us, right? That wisdom is attributed to, or that law is attributed to, or that interpretation is attributed to Rav Yehuda. And I purposely use those three categories as maybe more categories because it's not just law, it's not just midrash, and it's not just wisdom. Okay. All right, that's my introduction for today. It only took 10 minutes. All right. But I should remember to lead off. Were there any comments or reflections? Some of you write to me in between, and I love it when you write to me. I would always make time. It may take a few days, but I love when you reflect. If you want to reflect to me, if you're not comfortable doing it in front of the group. But does anybody have any reflections or questions or comments on what we've done until now? Okay. All right then. Malka, why don't you lead us off with number? I started to number the paragraphs, but then I forgot. So I apologize. The paragraphs are not numbered the way that I thought I would do so in the future. Go ahead. Number one, Rav Yehuda. Amar Rav Yehuda.
And Rabbi Yehuda said, there are three matters which, when one prolongs their duration, extends one's days and years. One who prolongs a prayer, one who prolongs meal time at the table, and one who prolongs time in the bathroom.
Okay. Prolonging would be the overall topic here. And I said we're going to be uncomfortable from a physiological point of view, or things that we don't like to talk about. The fact of the matter is it's called bathroom and there's no bath going on, right? And that's in many, many languages. Does anybody read the Hebrew here? Know what it's called in Hebrew? A bathroom?
Beit Kisei.
Beit HaKisei. What does that literally mean?
House of seats.
The house of the chair.
Of seats.
The house of
Right.
the seat, the house of the chair, the house of the potty, wherever you go with it, right? But it's the house of the chair. What a noble way of calling it an outhouse, right? An outhouse, a bathroom,
Right.
a water closet, WC, a 00, sherutim in Hebrew, sherutim, the services, right? The head, the loo. I don't know where loo comes from, but the loo, it's just so. What was it called in French, Claire?
Toilette, yeah.
Oh, so I don't know what toilet means. Does anybody know what the etymology of toilet is?
No.
Oh, I don't know. Does it
In
actually
the
mean
military,
that
though, it's called a latrine. I don't know where that comes
latrine?
from.
And what's the etymology of that? Do we
I have no
know?
idea. I don't know.
Okay, interesting thing, right? How do languages deal with topics which are unpleasant to deal with? The major ones that we come across in literature are in Jewish literature are the bathroom issues and sex, right? Those are the two things more than anything else that we come into. We have a lot of euphemisms for. Other areas are also heresy. There's a lot of euphemism used in heresy, or things that are perceived to be heretical. Claire, you might be tickled to know that in rabbinic literature, there aren't a lot, but the literary traditions that deal with Jesus, he's known as Oto Ha'ish, that man.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's that man to say that, not God. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
idea, or I think it's more like, the one whose name we will not say, that kind of a thing, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of euphemisms are in every language, and it's really interesting to check and see when we're doing it. We don't often realize that we're doing it. Okay, so Rav Yehuda, this is in a chain of Rabbi Yehuda's traditions, and now he's just. It doesn't necessarily need to connect to the other things that came before that. Although you could go back to last week's and you'll see how it's connected as well. But I want to make one connection, which I'm not sure is a real connection, but could also have been in the minds of those who were editing the Talmud into these chains, these like the email chain kind of a thing, that if you think of it as, okay. Anyway, one of his, where else did we have, the key word here in Hebrew is ma'arich, which is translated as prolonging. Where else did we have that prolonging? Anybody remember? It's a dental issue. Og's teeth that went down.
All right.
Right? So they went down. So perhaps that's one of the things that's reminding them as well. Speaking of Og, the picture that I had up that I asked Madeleine to put up, I'm going to ask her to put up now. If you could do that, Madeleine, to put up the picture that Dan Stork found searching for. I had told him that I don't know from Bill, or somebody asked, I don't know if it was Dan, that I don't remember seeing from William Gross's collection of Judaica, Og Melech HaBashan. But here's something, I think you said a 19th or 18th century rendition of an earlier Persian text, right? And do we know if it's a Hebrew text or a Muslim text?
It is it's Muslim.
Muslim, right? So that's really interesting, because this is obviously Og with the mountain on his head. Okay, we can go back to regular now. Madalena, thanks. This is that in that phase, it would be interesting to know if it's an illustration of what's called Sefer HaNevi'im, the book of the prophets, in which in Islamic literature, in which there are legends of Og that are beyond what's not in the Quran and not in the Hebrew Bible. And this particular legend of the mountain on the head is we know from post-biblical literature, right, from rabbinic literature, and there's an overlapping of that material that I hinted at, I think, when we did that material as well. And that's an interesting thing to say. How does that work in art as well? And the close connections, cultural connections between Jews and the people they lived amongst, wherever they were. It may have been an easier flow between Judaism and Islam over the years, because Muslims did not persecute Jews in the same way that Christians were persecuted in Muslim countries. There's less of an issue with it, and there wasn't always an issue with it, certainly not in the early stages of Islam. Jesus is a prophet, not a God, not son of God, but a prophet. But not only between Islam and Judaism, but also between Christianity and Judaism, which there's a lot of interaction, certainly in the first centuries of the Common Era, when the lines are it's not delineated so much, but also afterwards. Sometimes it often comes as polemical. It's knocking head to head, but there's interchange of traditions in the literary, in the liturgical, and in the art, of course. My favorite example. Okay, we're getting forget it. Let's get back to the text. Okay, so the three things, we need somebody here who's going to send me a message. Rabbi, you get back to the topic. Sasha, you want to do that? Okay. All right. Okay, so three things that you need to do, and as the Talmud often does, the Talmud will explain. The Talmud will explain. Will ask a question and explain very often the problematic, the challenging aspects of a statement that was just made in Rabbi Huda's name. And so now, and that's going to be more or less much of the next paragraph is going to be discussing this whole issue of these things that will prolong one's life. You want to live a long life? These are the things that you should do. Okay. And that's why the title, Taking Your Time. So why don't we go on, Malcolm, and read the next one. We'll talk about mealtime in a second.
And
Yeah.
one who prolongs prayer, is that a virtue? Didn't Rav Hiyaya Bar Abba say that Rav Yochanan said, anyone who prolongs prayer and expects it to be answered will ultimately come to heartache, as it is stated. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Rav Yitzhak said, three matters evoke a person's sins, and they are an inclined wall that is about to collapse, expecting prayer to be accepted, and passing a case against another to heaven. For heaven to pass judgment on another person causes one's own deeds to be examined and compared with the deeds of that other person.
Okay, a little bit complicated, so let's take them one at a time. Of the things in the first paragraph, right, the only thing that's asked upon here, in other words, it doesn't seem to bother him, the Talmud at this stage, about extending well, we'll get to mealtime and bathroom. I'm sorry, forget what I just said. But first, starting with the prayer, is praying for a long time, is that a good thing? There's another section in the Talmud brachot that talks about short prayers and long prayers. That's not the topic. That it doesn't expand that topic here so much. But the word is ma'arich. Ma'arich is to prolong one's prayer. And then the Talmud asks a question with using Rabbi Chia bar Abba, quoting Rabbi Yochanan, saying, "Wait a minute, we have something that seemingly contradicts that." And what is the contradiction? That anybody who prolongs prayer, and in the Hebrew here is kol hamarich betfilato uma'ayen ba. Anybody who prolongs one's prayer and ma'ayen, I'm saying in the Hebrew on purpose, because there's a challenge here amongst those of us that have been studying Judaism for many years. Here, the English translation is expects it to be answered. Ma'ayen expects it to be answered. La'ayen to something is to, from the word ayin, la'ayen is to, really look at something, expect, like with your eye, you expect something to happen. That's how it's meant here. But there's a trick, because has anybody ever heard the term iyun tefillah in modern Hebrew, or what many of us? So iyun tefillah in the parlance, if I was to say iyun tefillah, what would you say, Sasha?
To study, to examine nearly,
What's the purpose of iyun tefillah?
to learn it and to understand it.
Okay, in order for you to have better kavanah. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm going back to the different issues. So iyun tefillah is exactly what we talked about. I don't remember if it was yesterday when we were talking about prayer. I know that not everybody was there, but saying a prayer and having the kavanah, the intentionality for something, as opposed to just saying it mechanically. And iyun tefillah is that's a topic in schools, right? A class that you would have in a yeshiva that we had in yeshiva high school that I went to was iyun tefillah. We went through the prayer book to understand the prayers. It's not a customary yeshiva kind of a thing. You're expected to do that, to figure out that stuff on your own. Reading Musar literature, ethics literature, or if you're in the Hasidic side of Orthodoxy, Hasidic literature, there are books that are about iyun tefillah, commentaries to prayer books, right? That's iyun tefillah in at least in the last 100 years or so, maybe more. But the iyun tefillah here is something else. Iyun tefillah is the expectation that what you pray for will happen. That's a different kind of a thing. It's the same word. So what the Talmud has done is taken a tradition that says, if you prolong your prayer and you expect it, is to say, well, doesn't that challenge what Rabbi Yehuda said, prolonging your prayer? The way I've set it up, of course, will show that it's not a problem. But first, there's a proof text, and what's the proof text? Proof text is from Proverbs, wisdom literature, that hope deferred makes the heart sick. In other words, if you hope for this, if you buy the lottery ticket and think you're going to, and already fantasize about winning it's over $1 billion now. One of the things is over $1 billion. I saw maybe somebody won it in the last few days. But if you're already constructing your head the kind of places you're going to go and the houses you're going to build and the foundations you're going to establish to feed the poor and to solve the problem of homeless, all those kinds of things. I, of course, never think of that. If you think of it, then you're bound to be disappointed, right? In most of the cases. So what is Rabbi Yitzchak counters, or the Talmud gives this tradition in Rabbi Yitzchak's name that kind of further support this idea. And so now we're getting to another set of threes. So let's look at it on its own. The three matters that evoke a person's sins, meaning that you wake up the sleeping dogs. Is there the expression? You don't want to stir the pot, right? You don't want to muddy the water, right? These are the three things you have to be careful of. Otherwise, in the heavenly courts, perhaps they're thinking of Satan here, who's the guy who messes up things for us in the heavenly court, is going to make sure that the court knows your record, right? And so when do you have to be careful of those things? which I know that Sid is always careful not to stand next to an inclining wall because it may fall down. But in other words, in a dangerous situation where something's about to fall down. The second is when you expect your prayer to be fulfilled. That's also when you're going to wake up. You're going to wake up the spirits who know your past, right? You're going to and the last one is when you, and this is according to Steinsaltz because the text is not entirely clear. When you are praying to heaven for somebody else to get punished for what they've done, and it's as if heaven is saying, "Oh, you're praying for somebody else. Well, let's take a look at your record right now." Right. So these three things are the places where you don't want your record to be looked at closely. That idea, which may seem silly to some people, is all over the place. We're going to soon be, we're in 2 weeks from now, it's going to be Rosh Chodesh, the new moon of Elul, and there's a custom to blow the shofar every day leading up to Rosh Hashanah, except for which day? Anybody? We don't have the synagogue experience, so except for the day before Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah.
Before, that's what I was-
The eve of Rosh Hashanah, you don't blow the shofar. Anybody know why?
Does it have to do with carrying?
No, that has to do with Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat,
Oh, okay.
right? That has to do with, and we're going to work in our congregation, we're going to get to that because we only do one day of Rosh Hashanah, and the first day of Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat, and we will blow the shofar, and we'll talk about it at the time. But you don't do it on Erev Rosh Hashanah in order, the Kedei Levalbel et Satan, in order to confuse Satan. Satan says, "Oh, they're blowing the shofar, they're getting ready." So he's getting his books in order in this fantasy world of what's happening when we are being judged on the day of judgment on Rosh Hashanah, and then the days we have in between to kind of the make-up session to get ourselves repented in the days of repentance before the Day of Atonement. And so suddenly he's got all of his files out because he hears the shofar blowing. They say, "Oh, shofar's not blowing today." Oh, so I guess they're not doing it. Right? I mean, it's so childish, it's so silly, and yet that is the reason that's given in halachic literature. Now, one might say, well, it's in order to, you don't want to overuse it, build the anticipation the same way that many people don't eat matzah, from the first of Nisan for the 2 weeks before Passover, so that when you have the matzah, something special. I met people that don't eat matzah the whole year for that reason, right? There's a psychology to it, but yet Satan, that's anyway, that's in lots of thought, and not just, it's what my father would call, a blessed memory, would call bubba mices, right? It's just nonsense. It's grandmother's tales or grandparents' tales. But it's in that's dictates a lot of our practice. Yeah. Okay. So we have a challenge. The challenge is here is it's been brought to, you say, Rav Yehuda, that praying for a long time is a good thing and will elongate your life as well, will prolong your life. No, elongate is not the right word. Prolong your life, your life, but also your wife, will prolong your life when you pray a long time. No, but we know that praying a long time, and by the way, and also expecting it to happen, is not a good thing. And we also know from Rav Yitzchak that those one of three things that get you into trouble, right? Praying for a long time and expecting it to happen. I think you already understand how the solution to this problem is going to happen. This may be this faux problem, because it's not really a problem, because the two things it wasn't exact. But let's see. Go ahead, Malka, and finish this section off, please.
Okay. Not difficult. This, the latter, where one expects prayers to be accepted, while this, the former, where one does not expect prayers to be accepted. And how should one act? By increasing supplication. All
right. So I'm not sure if this is the same voice that's saying these two things. The first is the solution to the faux problem. I would call it a faux problem. Is you're not getting it exact. You weren't listening to exactly what the words were. It's the first one is A, and the second one is A and B. So A and B don't contradict A and A match up. It's only the B that contradicts the A, okay? And then we get this, so then you can imagine, he said, oh, but Rabbi, but what do we do? So what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to, or we're not supposed to? Are we not supposed, are we supposed to pray? I think I'm reading into it. Are we supposed to pray without hope? Right? Isn't part of prayer encouraging us to hope for something to get better? And so what the answer is, pray with even more kavanah, I would say. That would be my interpretation. Pray with more intentionality here. Kavanah, intentionality. And the word that's brought up here is rachameh, which is rachamim, rechem, mercy, compassion, God's compassion. And that's something that's going to guide us in the paragraphs to come as well. We'll constantly looking over this to see how did one paragraph come after another. But we're still now in the process of going through Rabbi Yehuda's tradition in section number 1. So we dealt with the issue of praying for a long time. So the bottom line is, if this was really about halacha, Jewish law, yes, you should take your time in prayer. Don't expect it to necessarily happen, but take your time in prayer. So now Sid is wondering, because he's interested in living a long life, he's wondering, yeah, but what about that second thing that they said, that hamarich al shulchano, that you're supposed to sit at the table for a long time, to sit at the table for at a meal for a long time, and that's this section. Sid, why don't you read number 4? Or sorry, I wrote down number 4, but the prolonging mealtime.
Not difficult?
No, prolonging mealtime.
Oh, prolonging mealtime at the table. Perhaps a poor person will come and one might give them food. As it is written, the altar, 3 cubits high, and the length thereof 2 cubits, was of wood. And so the comers thereof, the length thereof, and the walls thereof were also of wood. And the Lord, it is written in the continuation of that verse, and he said unto me, this is the table that is before the Lord. It begins with the altar and concludes with the table. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer both say, as long as the temple stood, the altar atoned for Israel. Now a person's table is that which atones.
So I see 3 kind of steps in this, and again, a little bit complicated, but the first thing is prolonging the mealtime at a table. So unlike the previous sections, wait a minute, I know something contradicts that. No, what do you mean prolonging the table? Why would you sit at the table for a long time? And we're thinking to ourselves, well, that's great. That Claire's thinking of French meals. You sit down and you have wine and you have this. And I know, because I know that's what the sisters are always doing. They're always sitting down with candles on the table, and or wherever you live and whatever your aspect we go to restaurants, and I always notice that we sit down and there are people around us that have already finished their meal when we sit down, and they're still there holding that table when we get up. We have a different, but people like to sit in a restaurant. They have the time, sit for long. People like to eat at the dining room table, or those that the reaction to fast food, right? The slow food movement, right? Let's do cooking slow. There's something to be said for that. That's what we're hoping to see. That's not what the Talmud says, according to the latter interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda's original tradition. We don't know what Rabbi Yehuda intended, but the interpretation that's given here is that no, this has to do with something quite different, and that is, the longer you stay at the meal, the more chance there is that a poor person will knock on your door and ask for something to eat. Right? That's a very different way of looking at it. And so it's not physiological, right? It's not a physiological thing to eat, digest your food. It's not a cultural thing because you're lifting yourself up to a higher level of it's a social justice thing. Really interesting. The more you sit down, okay, so people will go in their own lines where that might help. I'm sure people are ringing in their ears, perhaps, is the Seder table, right? Where we actually say, anybody who's hungry, come and sit at our table. It's rare that somebody actually expects somebody to come who's on the outside, who's homeless or hungry is going to come and sit down at your table, but the idea is there. Now, but the proof text, though, goes to a different place. The proof text goes to something that has nothing to do with the poor people, does it, right? Proof text is very intricate text from Ezekiel, not from the laws in the Torah, but the Ezekiel's, the second half of Ezekiel is Ezekiel, the prophet, priestly prophet, who is depicting what the temple and things what the land of Israel and the temple will look like in the days to come. It never happens that way, but that's the way Ezekiel prophesies, and he describes the altar in such a way that first the altar and then the table. So in this simplistic way, altar, table. Oh, I know what I want to say, right? I want to say that and just points that out in this. I want to bring this tradition from Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, say, yes, there is a strong connection between the altar and the table. In the time of the temple, the altar was the thing that atoned for the people. In our time, when there is no altar, it's the table. And this is a roundabout way of saying that which features in other parts of the Talmud, where explicitly he says that the table, one's table, is an altar, and that I could think of a few things in Jewish practice that are descended from this particular ideas. Anybody think of it, by the way? Can anybody have an example of how we treat today in Jewish practice a table as an altar?
When you put you're on Friday towards sundown, you put the candles on the table and you light them and you make the bracha. That's
Right,
part
so
of it.
Right. So preparation of Shabbat, the practice of Shabbat on the table, the way that people treat tables, and other cultures do this as well, right? The setting of the table before them, but the fact that the table should be set and those that have the custom of actually lighting the candles on and making kiddush, the blessing over the wine, which we're going to get to in a
Yes.
second as well,
And
or
about
the
the
blessing over
challah.
the, right? The challah, the bread, all that.
Represents the showbread.
Right. So
Maybe.
let's hold on just a second, Malka. We'll get to that. So the Shabbat practice is one general way. So now Malka brings up this idea of the two loaves that are reflecting that we have for various reasons, but one of the reasons is the showbread, or the shoe bread, as it used to be written, SHEW bread, lechem hapanim, that went on the table, right? And so we there the table is connected inextricably to the altar, but other practices,
Using salt?
exactly right. The custom of using salt. By the way, these practices are later practices. They're not, as far as I know, they're not in the Talmud, but they are based on this idea. Having salt on the table and dipping the bread anytime, not just Shabbat, but anytime dipping bread in salt. As my father, blessed memory, would often say, that's because we were a desert people. It has nothing to do with it. Oh, okay, Dad, that might be part of the reason as well. But the way that it's stated in tradition is that because there was salt because of the meat of the sacrifices to get the blood out, we have salt on the table as well. There's a custom that I was saying, I did a little research yesterday in some of the books. I often said to people, we try to cover the knife, the challah knife, or any knives, but the challah knife, we cover it when we say Birkat HaMazon, the blessing after the meal. And I always thought that was a Hasidic custom because those are the homes that I saw that done in. Turns out it's not. I think it's in the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, who mentions that particular custom. And the idea is the same idea of not having iron on the altar. We talked about the shamir, the magical animal that cuts the stone. The fact that Solomon's stones for Solomon's temple were not quarried in Jerusalem, they were quarried someplace else. And then when they were brought, the fact that David wasn't the one to build the temple, but Solomon, because David had blood in his, he was a man of war, iron, war, those kind of things. A knife is something that should not be either taken off the table or covered when you say the blessing. And so those, I think those are the three things that I came up with: the salt, the knife. Oh, there's another one that I hadn't thought. Oh, two more that I hadn't thought of that I saw in looking at especially recent Orthodox literature on this topic. That is practices that are based on this part of the Talmud. How else do we treat the table sacred? One is that we always bless with a full cup of wine and with a full loaf of bread. Technically, you're supposed to say a motzi over a full loaf of bread, not over a piece of bread, not over a slice of bread. That's why when we're strict on Shabbat to say the blessing over 2 full loaves of bread, right? Yeah, I know if people don't have 2 loaves, they use 1, or maybe what's left over from the night before, or maybe 2 pieces of bread, okay. But the idea of having a full piece of bread and a full cup of wine, you say the blessing over wine on Shabbat, the Kiddush, it can't be from a glass that you've drunk from. It's got to be a full cup. And then the last thing is, and this you see this not so much in the liberal world, not even in the modern Orthodox world, but in the Haredi world, you don't sit on a table. You don't sit or stand on a table. We understand standing, bro, but you don't sit on a table. And then I saw that there's one modern Orthodox, relatively modern Orthodox rabbi who I had contact with in the old days, Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, wrote recently that that's only a table that is set for food, but if it's another table, you can sit on the table. So those are issues that come from the fact the sacred, the holiness of a table. Okay, all right, too much perhaps. Let's go on. So and now we get to the part that Richard's been waiting for, and that's prolonging time in the bathroom. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I like to prolong time in the bathroom. Prolonging time in the bathroom, is that a virtue? Wasn't it taught? 10 things bring a person to suffer from hemorrhoids. Eating the leaves of bulrushes, grape leaves, tendrils of grapevines, the palate and the tongue of an animal, the spine of fish, a salty fish that is not fully cooked, and one who drinks wine dregs, and one who wipes himself with lime and clay, and one who wipes himself with a stone with which another person wiped himself. And some say, and suspending oneself too much in the bathroom. Rashi, when one sits on one's knees and opens oneself up too much. Steinsaltz, when one tries too hard.
Okay, so you'll notice the mnemonic aspect of these traditions that tells us something about the roots in the orality, right? 3s and 10s, right? There's a lot of these are lists of things. It's how you remember. So you don't just say, well, these are the things. Well, there's 10. I got to get 10. So you keep at it. That's something which is common to all traditions that were originally oral. So any case, so again, a challenge. You said you're supposed to stay in the bathroom for a long time. Wait a minute. We have a tradition that says these are the things that bring hemorrhoids, but it's not in the 10 things, is it? Isn't that interesting? It's not in what seems to be the original tradition of 10 things. And we could go at length at what are these 10 things and what do they mean, but I don't think that's really the point today to go into that. And are those things really cause how hemorrhoids cause? None of that. This is Talmudic medicine, right? You want to go there, you could do that with somebody else. But and not just because of this issue. I just think we're so limited in what we can know. But then as an afterthought, and some say there's this issue of suspending oneself too much. And now, tala, what does it mean to suspend oneself in the bathroom? Well, the Aramaic here is ambiguous, right? So we have 2 commentaries we use a lot. One is Rashi, the older commentary. One is Steinsaltz, the 20th century commentary. And so Rashi tells us, what does it mean to suspend oneself? It means to position oneself in such a way on the knees to, okay, I'll let your imaginations run wild with you. Steinsaltz has an interpretation which is a little bit tougher in my view from the word itself, talia or tale. For those that I'm sorry, it's in Hebrew. It's not in Aramaic. Va'af hatole atzmo. tole atzmo, hangs oneself, suspends oneself. And he, from the context, I think he says mitametz, he says in Hebrew. Mitametz means when you, all right, when you try too hard, right? And we know, actually, that I think many of us do know that might be an issue. So I think Steinsaltz's commentary here is a good use of context and what we know of common sense, as opposed to maybe in Rashi's time there was something they did, but this seems a little bit strange to us, that particular thing. Okay. In any case, though, this seems to contradict what Rav Yehuda said, that you should spend a long time in the bathroom. And what is the solution to this, what I would call perhaps a faux contradiction, but this contradiction, Richard?
Not difficult. The latter refers to prolonging one's time and suspending oneself, while the former, is when one prolongs but does not suspend oneself.
Right, and you could say you don't have to be a Talmudic sage to understand that they just weren't careful in their reading. But I think this is a good lesson. To me, the form here, more than the content, is a wonderful lesson as to how we might think of acting ourselves. How often do we see, and do we do ourselves, where somebody says something in the political arena and we say, yeah, but how about that? Except for that isn't really this, is it? Right? It's that plus something else. And the thing that bothered you was that other thing, and we do that all the time. We see it all the time. And so while it's easy for us to look afar at this page of Talmud and say, look at why don't they know how to read carefully? Right? Maybe part of the message here is, hey, folks, you're doing this as well. And this Talmud keeps getting printed, and now everybody, not just yeshiva students, are studying it, because there's a lot to learn here about ourselves as holding up a reflection. I know you have to take a lot of steps to do this. I saw that, and this happens with every class, right? We get a huge response that people want to be part of it, and then people drop off because it's difficult to keep up with this. It's not what they expected, and for whatever reason, and they don't like the way I teach. There could be a lot of reasons, but if we stick with it, I think that these are some of the valuable lessons that we have in doing this. Now, you could say, well, why don't we just read a book about communications today? Something just came out about the pilug, the rift in Israeli society, the rift in American society. Yeah, you could do that, but here we get to do it in the arena, for lack of a better word, in the court of Jewish literature. We get to continue that conversation with our ancestors who lived, 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, in a different land, a different reality, and we're part of that. And it allows us sometimes to take a step back. Whoa. Look at them. What do you mean look at them? Look at you. Look at us. So that's kind of, I as many of you here, I'm responding to some of your questions and comments that you make to me individually. And if there's others, please let me know. So before we go on to in depth with the time we have left about bathroom issues, let's just take a stop now, take a pause for a second, and any reactions or comments to what we've done until now today.
I have a question.
Please, Malka.
It's on the very first section that we read today, section 1. It says, Me'arikin Yamav Ushnotav, right? So to prolong your days and your years, it said days and years, which seems repetitive, right? Does that have to do with the same Pesach passage that we read in your lifetime and in your days? When they talk about, and why did they say both here? Are they related?
Yeah, I don't know that they're related necessarily to Pesach, but they're related in the fact that that's how we express ourselves.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it hyperbole, it's poetic language, right? I love you. I love you much. I love you so much. I mean, okay, that's not a good example. A better example is I'm blanking. We use, and certainly biblical language and Jewish literature based on biblical literature has a rich history of parallelisms, right? Of synonyms being used. And so I think that's how it's connected. But here's something else that I was thinking of that I didn't mention beforehand. So this will prolong your days and your years, repetitive, but poetic, I think. Where do we have that? It's interesting. There's two mitzvahs in the Torah, maybe the only two, but the two that have come to my mind that explicitly say that if you do this, you will have a long life. And they're not mentioned here. Anybody know what those are?
Honor your mother.
Honor your mother and father.
Right.
Right, honoring your parents, right? That Leman Yaricha Yamecha. And there's another case which is a little bit more difficult to do, which is why people don't remember it so much.
Birds, the thing with
birds.
birds.
Right, sending the bird away.
Oh,
the mother
right.
bird away before you take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in both cases, those
got that
those two keys, the Torah gives the sahar, the reward, and that doesn't happen, right? So that's interesting. That would be, and I was hoping to find one of the medieval commentaries that mentioned that. Why, that's the kind of thing you find. Why didn't they mention this? Didn't find anything. In general, our chapter is not richly dealt with in medieval writings, because most of those writings deal with halachic literature, with halakha, with what you do, and not with Agadic literature. And this is considered to be Agadic. Anything else? Yes, Rita Claire.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but I couldn't help but thinking, if you, I'm sure all of us have experience living in a home with only one bathroom and several people. So going back to don't prolong your time in the bathroom. I could remember knocking on the door, aren't you done yet?
Absolutely.
Anyway, I couldn't help myself. I had to say that.
Absolutely, and it is a good point. There is something to be said for sitting down with a newspaper and now without spending a lot of time. Look at why you see this in public bathrooms all the time. Suddenly it takes so much longer at Starbucks because they're on their phones, dude. Of course they're on their phones. Everybody knows they're on their phones. It used to be you wouldn't dare walk in with your newspaper into Starbucks into the bathroom, right? But what you do at home is one thing. What you do in public or in a home where there are multiple tuchuses and minimal bathrooms, right? So yeah, I think so. It's absolutely appropriate to say that, Rita Claire, and what other values are inherent. I want to say that if people want to know why I'm so happy in Palm Springs, of course it's you, of course it's them. But one of the reasons is we never had a house that had so many bathrooms per capita. We got 3 toilets for 2 people. And that's what, and even when somebody stays with us, we've got 2 for 3 people, whatever. Okay, so, and we look at the first flat we lived in, it had, of course, for many years, 1 for all of us, and for a time, 1 for all 7 of us. And when we finally renovated a place, bought a place, and we renovated a little bit, we were able to buy a place in early 90s. We squeezed everything, added another bathroom, okay. Yeah, so it's a very real thing, less thought about here, I think, in many people's homes. That wasn't an issue in the home that I grew up in that had multiple bathrooms, right? Okay, all right then. So, but we continue in the issue of bathrooms, and so Rita Claire, why don't you read for us the second paragraph on the second page that starts with "like that time," right? Now, here's another lovely part. We had another issue of this, right? It was there are traditions in the names of rabbis, and then somebody says, wait a minute, I got a story for you. True story. You can imagine the guy. True story. Go ahead.
Like that time when a matron said to Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Eli, your face is like that of pig farmers and usurers.
Okay, before we go on, what is a face of a pig farmer and a usurer? That is somebody who charges interest on a loan. What does that face look like? So don't go to where your minds were going to a man who looks like the pigs that he feeds, right? Don't go there, and don't go to a man who, sneering because he's taking evil, a loan shark. Instead, the meaning here is somebody who has an easy life. Those are 2 well-paid professions. I know you didn't know that, but sometimes you got to learn the background from other other Talmudic sources and whatever, to grow pigs, to raise pigs, you'd think that would not be well paid, right? In the land of Israel. But of course, this is a time where there are many non-Jews in the land of Israel, the Romans, occupying Romans, or in, and this is an earlier tradition, or it might reflect the fact that maybe abstention from pork wasn't as prevalent as our sources would like us to believe. That's an interesting thing unto its own that is connected to archaeology, but that's for another time. But think of these in terms of cushy jobs. You have the face of somebody who has, works on, an investment banker. I don't know. They work hard, I guess. Okay. So that's the background. So in this story, a matrona in Latin matrona, a noble woman, matronita. There are a number of stories of rabbis and matronita. In fact, there's another story exactly with these two characters. Not involved, but a parallel story. Perhaps I'll mention it afterwards. But let's go ahead. Go ahead with the story.
He said to her, honestly, those two occupations are prohibited to me. Rather, why is it that my face is so nice? There are 24 bathrooms between my house and the study hall. And when I walk, I stop and examine myself in all of them. 24 bathrooms.
Right. So it's kind of
And
like
does that mean each of these bathrooms had a mirror?
there.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah, but when he examines himself, is examining himself whether he needs to go or not to go. That's the idea here, right? It's kind of like when those of us that drive back and forth to LA, we're thinking about where are we going to stop? What gas stations have restrooms that you go into? What Starbucks or just drive up? These are the kind of things that you think of, right? You don't want to get stuck without. The idea that you hold something in is actually against halakha. That's that's not discussed here. To not go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom, if you can, of course, but that is something you're not supposed to do, and it's a health-based halakha, if you will. There's a parallel in Masechet Nidarim in the Babylonian Talmud, the tractate that deals with vows, and in the parallel, the matrona asks him, the same Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't ask him about why she says to him, is it right can you be a teacher and a drunk at the same time? He accuses her, she accuses him of having a face that looks so jolly that he must be drunk, that he must be high. And then he answers back and he says, in the same words, honestly, that's not the case at all. I have trouble even drinking the wine for Kiddush on Shabbat and the 4 cups of wine. In fact, I have a headache from Passover to Shavuot. He says, I wrap my head in a towel because I have a headache because I had to drink the 4 cups of wine. Right. So it's interesting how traditions, of course, they're remembered. I'm sure somebody's written on this someplace. It's kind of beyond the purvey. It's the stuff I love to research, but I did get to that parallel, and it's really interesting. What function do stories about rabbis who have meant the other, whether it's the Caesar in some stories, the Caesar himself, a Roman general, a soldier, a noblewoman, a Roman noblewoman. What do those stories serve? How they serve? But here it goes to serve something just we're talking about bathrooms. Look you want to know about prolonging long life? Rabbi Yehuda had such a wonderful face. He had a punim. He had a good punim, a healthy punim because of this. Okay. Oh, can we? I understand that somebody has to go. Somebody has to leave. I mean, but let's try to finish this page if we would. Okay. Sister Claire, why don't you read this section for us? And Rav Yehuda.
And Rav Yehuda said, 3 things curtail a person's days and years. One who is given the Torah scroll to read and does not, one who is given a cup of blessing and does not, and one who conducts oneself with an air of superiority. Okay, so we're back to the chain of traditions in the name of Rav Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, okay? And here it's the flip side. 3 things that give you a long life and 3 things that give you a short life. And what are the 3 things that give you a short life? If you're called to the Torah, let's put it in order. You're called for an aliyah and you don't read. I mean,
that's the context here. The context is a liturgical context. You're being honored to call and read from the Torah, because in the olden times, whoever was called for what we call today an aliyah, they were expected to read the passage properly, and with trope, without trope. I don't know what the expectations were in rabbinic times, but in a Yemenite synagogue to this very day, or at least the older traditions of Yemenite synagogues, if you're called to the Torah, you're expected to read. So you have to prepare that reading the night before to know how to read it properly. With time, our custom became that either the leader, a Torah reader, or the cantor, or whoever would read from the Torah, and other people would just say the blessings. So this would apply today. If you were called for an aliyah, you're really supposed to accept it. I mean, I'm careful, certainly, because some people, you ask them if you want to give them an aliyah, and they don't want to for various reasons. Okay. But in any case, that's a way to shorten your life, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Another one is, if you are at a table, and probably context here is not to say the blessing over the wine for kiddush. Something tells me that the context is to use the cup of wine to say the blessing after the meal, grace after the meal. When you have three, technically you're supposed to use a cup of wine to do that. I know that's not a practice that people are familiar with. You see it on Shabbat in the Orthodox world, where they'll have a cup of wine poured for Birkat HaMazon, for the grace after the meal. If you're being honored with that, then you shouldn't pass that honor by, or say the blessing. We're going to see that they take it in a very literal way. And then finally, if you're a Schwitzer, right? If you're not a humble person, a Schwitzer being the Israeli Yiddish term for a bragger, a braggart. Okay, so now let's go into Sister Claire. Go ahead. Now we're going to go into, in typical Talmudic fashion, how do you know each of these things with proof texts? And Dan, remember, the proof texts don't necessarily mean mathematical proof texts. Go ahead.
Torah scroll to read and does not, as it is written. It is your life and the length of your days.
All right, so I'm just stop you between each one. So a very literal understanding. It is the life. So again, it is the life and length of your days, Malka. The double use of life and length of days, right? That poetic repetition, and that, of course, this is said poetically, not that really that if you're called to read from the Torah, right? But this is how the midrash works. Go ahead.
A cup of blessing over which to recite a blessing and does not, as it is written. I will bless them that bless you. And
that's really far-fetched, right? That's from Abraham in Genesis. I will bless those who bless you. When you bless them, I will bless them. That's a blessing of being a good neighbor, not necessarily saying the blessing over the cup of wine, taken out of context to prove it to be put in a new context. Go ahead. And finally,
and one who conducts oneself with an air of superiority, as Rabbi Hama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, why did Joseph die before his brothers? And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation, because he conducted himself with an air of superiority.
Okay, so this one is a little bit complex. I messed up graphically here. It should be the quote, and Joseph died, should be in parentheses. That's added. That's not in the text itself. That was added by I think by Steinsaltz in his rendering of the text of the Gemara. But that's what it refers to. Why did Joseph die before his brothers? And then nobody said, where do we know that from? Because we all know that Joseph died before his brothers. But then somebody at some point said, well, how do you know that? Because it says, and Joseph died, and all his brothers. And of course, the literal meaning of the text is Joseph died, and all his brothers died, and all that generation died. But instead, if the punctuation is, and Joseph died, full stop, and all his brothers in it, they continued to live. Basically, taking Joseph out of context to use him as an immodest person, a lack of humility, which caused him to live a shorter life than his brothers. Okay. And then finally, we go into another tradition, which is not which is a variation. It's a tradition from Rav Yehuda, and this time in the name of Rav. And Megan, if you would read this last one for us.
Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, 3 matters require mercy: a good king, a good year, and a good dream.
A good king, as it is written, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the water courses. He turns it whithersoever he will. A good year, as it is written, the eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year even unto the end of the year. A good dream, as it is written, O Lord, by these things men live, and although therein is the life of my spirit, wherefore I will recover me and make me to live.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Oh,
a
I
good
looked that
example
up,
of I'll explain the last part in a second, of
Okay.
wisdom literature. You want, again, but three things need mercy. You can't assume that they're going to be all right. Natural charisma, leadership qualities when it comes to a king. No, you need God's help. If you want the king to work out, and brings a verse, not from the book of Kings, where there could have been lots of verses that showed how kings did not work out. But anyway, from Proverbs. A good year, again, one of these, it's almost like kind of a platitude, right? And then a good dream is just an interesting, from a language point of view. The verse in Isaiah says, "V'tachlimeni," and you will, and you will, and you will recover. Yeah, v'tachlimeni, you will recover me. For those that know, when Ella is here. When you say in modern Hebrew, refuah shlema is kind of an old way to say to somebody, hope you get better soon. A newer way is hachlama mihira. Hachlama mihira. And the hachlama is recovery. So the word hachlama in Isaiah has to do with recovering something, but it also means the same root, chalom, is dream. And therefore, a good dream, a text is taken, not only is the text taken out of context, the word is taken out of the context and given the same root, but a different meaning, or the same root or the same form of same kind of word. I don't know if it's exactly the same root or not, because chetz have two. Okay, doesn't, yeah. Enough. This, I ended with this one because not next week, but I think the week after, we're going to enter into a long period. We'll see how long we last, if we can get through it, of what is called Sefer HaChalamot, the Book of Dreams, in the Babylonian Talmud. Really fascinating stuff, some really bizarre stuff, and really interesting from a cultural point of view how it happened. But and that's how we get there. Right? That's why I wanted to end with this, with these traditions. We're going to have more other traditions that are, we'll see, and we'll be able to see how they got to this flow of consciousness kind of a thing, right? What's going on here? Stream of consciousness. Okay, comments or questions?
I now know why I don't eat tongue.
There you go. Right. Okay.
And why my mother had hemorrhoids.
Yeah, okay. Well, grape leaves, this could mean only fresh grape leaves. I'm not sure it applies to the kinds that are used in stuffed grape leaves, but okay. All right. Anybody else? Yes, Rita Claire.
I'm going to go back to the dinner thing, the meal. I have a different viewpoint about meals. I know we're supposed to give thanks and so forth, but to me, I have always felt the family who eats together stays together. So I view getting together for meals and giving prayer is a wonderful thing, but getting together with people you care about is kind of religious in its own aspect.
Good point. All I would say is that one doesn't contradict the other, right? It's not either or. Right? It's both and both. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right then. So thanks. And Thelma, thanks for being here. It's nice to meet you. Nice to have you with us. Don't remember seeing you before, but if you have, I ask your forgiveness.
No, it's my first time. Shalom, Toda Rabba.
Bevakasha. All right. Be well, everybody, and we'll see you on Shabbat, some of you on Shabbat, otherwise next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.